Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I am excited to bring to you, well, I don't know, it's exciting talking about a virus, but I'm excited to come to you today to talk about Norovirus 101, what event professionals, event planners need to know about food safety. And I'm bringing to you my friend, Francine Shaw, who is the co-host of the podcast, Don't Eat Poop, but she's also the founder and CEO of Savvy Food Safety, Track Savvy, and and My Food Source. And she has made it a mission to champion food safety in every corner of the industry. So hello, Francine.
Hi, Tracy. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. This is really important to have this conversation. And from the LinkedIn post, it's really relevant to you at the moment.
It sure is. Some of the listeners probably saw this, but I spent my day yesterday in the ER with my aunt who was diagnosed with norovirus. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how convenient when tomorrow, that's what I'm going to spend part of my day speaking about. I spend my day speaking about diarrhea and vomiting anyway.
And now you're dealing with it personally. Yes.
You say that to some people and it's like, oh my God, she said diarrhea and vomiting. But when you're in my world, it's like daily conversation. So.
Right. We don't want people coming and serving us food when they have diarrhea.
No, you do not. And norovirus is, first of all, you don't want, if you've ever seen part of our logo for Don't Eat Poop, it's the little guy that's on his hands and knees spewing vomit and diarrhea. If I have one thing, it's a sense of humor. And it says norovirus, you don't want it. And you do not want it. It is like a miserable illness. And it's the number one foodborne illness in the United States. And I'm going to venture to say that you and everybody listening to this podcast has had it at least once. I don't know how you can possibly avoid it, especially if you have children. Did you remember? And you have a child.
No, I have children.
You don't have children. You don't have, so anybody that has children, your kids are healthy all summer long. Mm-hmm. As soon as they go back to school, everybody in the house is sick. And you've all suddenly got what people refer to as the stomach flu or the stomach bug, which is diarrhea and vomiting. And if you've got diarrhea and vomiting, and it's that projectile vomiting and explosive diarrhea, that's norovirus. That's what it is. And this stuff is so highly contagious that one person in the household isn't going to get it. Everybody's going to get it once one person has it, unless you are, I'm going to venture to say, work in the medical field and know how to prevent everybody from getting this. Matt's my co-host on Don't Eat Poop, and we joke because he has like 30 children, and I'm exaggerating. There's 10, but
it's still a lot.
It is. One person in his house gets it, and they all get it. 14 people live in the household, and his wife lives in the NICU, works in the NICU. She probably lives there too, but she works in the NICU. And that's how contagious it is. And if anybody knows how to prevent illness from spreading throughout the household, she does. So It's just so contagious. It only takes, I feel like I'm ranting here because of my trauma yesterday. It only takes like 18 particles to get this virus. Wow. 18 particles. Now, if you have a straight pen, for example, you can fit enough norovirus particles on that pinhead to infect 1,000 people.
What?
1,000 people. And that's according to the CDC.
Wow.
So that's how contagious this is. You can infect people for it lives in your stool for a few weeks after you feel better. And you remain contagious for a little while after you feel better. So it's just, people call it the flu. It's not the flu. It's norovirus. And it's a big deal. And we have outbreaks of this year after year. And bottom line is it's because people don't wash their hands or they don't wash them effectively. And it spreads. because it takes what we call the fecal oral route. People go to the restroom, don't wash their hands, and it ends up on doorknobs or tongs or someplace, and then somebody else ingests that fecal matter from an infected individual.
Now I'm going to sing happy birthday twice every time I go to when I'm washing my hands. So my friend Christina just said on Instagram, and we've got a bunch of people listening to us on Instagram. She said, just had a norovirus outbreak at a meeting I planned, but luckily wasn't on site for. Heading to one in Chicago on Sunday and wondering how one can avoid it. Questions that she should ask the hotel?
Well, yeah. Do they have a norovirus response plan?
Okay.
What is their plan for cleaning up if somebody gets sick? Because if somebody vomits, like, you need to plan to just clean up a 25-foot circle around where somebody got sick, because this stuff spreads not just where you see it, but it's airborne. Okay. So your questions for catering partners, like, what food safety training do they receive? Have they received any food safety training? What kind of food handling and food preparation, how is that done? What kind of cleaning protocols do they follow? Are there sanitation protocols, or do we just rinse and wipe? Because that's not going to kill it. Rinsing and wiping isn't going to kill it. You need to disinfect. How do we prevent cross-contamination? Is it buffet style, or are we plating foods? Buffets are norovirus's dream. I mean, buffets are a dream come true for spreading norovirus. Wow. Because if somebody goes to the restroom and they don't wash their hands, and this is, I hate to be vivid, but sometimes
she just said all of her events are buffet. Everything is.
This is sometimes the only way to get the message across. And if anybody listened to our podcast yesterday, there was something that said, be like Bob. I'm going to be like Bob. If somebody has norovirus and they go to the restroom and they don't wash their hands properly, and it's almost impossible to not get some fecal matter, whether it's visible or not, on your hands, and they go out to the salad bar and they pick up the tongs, they're going to get poo on those tongs. Where do you normally find the tongs at the salad bowl? In the lettuce.
In the lettuce, yeah.
So
yes, exactly. They're not putting it back down on the thing. Yeah.
In the lettuce. So now we've got poo lettuce, right? So what's going to happen is those people are going to go through the line, pick up some poo lettuce with those poo tongs and make themselves a poo salad. And that is what happens at the salad bar. And everybody that picks up those tongs from an individual that did not wash their hands, it's cross-contamination across the board.
Okay. I just typed in here onto the thing, poo tongs equals poo salad into the comments. That's crazy.
I want to continue with the questions like, what are their policies for staff illness? If somebody calls in and says, hey, I'm not feeling real well right now, my stomach's not good, I've got diarrhea, I don't think I'm going to be able to work today, can you come in for just a few hours, is not the answer to that. They need to stay home. Okay. They need to stay home. So what are their staff policies? Have they had any previous outbreaks?
So what can we do proactively? Like she's sending her group here. She's not going to be on site. How can she be proactive with the hotel to prevent this from happening, besides asking the questions that you just said?
So for risk mitigation, she could evaluate the layout and the food service styles. Again, food service style is big, plate versus buffet. Maybe if they want to do a buffet style, maybe they have servers behind the buffet serving the food as opposed to self-serve buffet. That is an excellent idea. Cruise ships used to have a horrendous problem with norovirus. It's not as bad as it used to be. A lot of, at least the higher end cruise ships, what they've started doing is they've started having servers at the buffets plating the food for the guests. So that's an option. Provide plenty of hand washing stations for the guests. Something that I want to point out is hand sanitizer. People are like, hand sanitizer everywhere. It doesn't kill norovirus. It does nothing for norovirus.
Okay.
So hand sanitizer is not going to kill norovirus because it's an enveloped virus. You need soap, or I'm sorry, it's a non-enveloped virus. I said that wrong. It isn't going to kill it. You need soap and water to kill the norovirus. You use the hand sanitizer in addition to washing your hands. It was never meant to be a replacement for. I speak really fast. Am I speaking too fast?
Oh, no, you're great. You're fine. You're fine. I'm following it all. Yeah.
Good for you. Educational training, or again, back to is the staff educated on food safety protocols? She's within her bounds to ask for evidence that they do training.
Right. Yeah. Like follow-up training just before your meeting starts. I'm like, hey, can I watch you? Can my staff and your staff go through this training just before we start serving foods?
Exactly.
Started hearing you.
And then prepare responses and strategies for suspected outbreaks. What are we going to do if there is an outbreak? What are those plans going to look like?
Right.
So,
yeah,
those are
okay. Those are great questions. And she just said, had to be buffet. It's all on a flow, but it's next week. So don't think they can increase staff at this point. Maybe they can put reminder signs in the restrooms. That's a great idea.
Well, legally, hand washing signs should be in the restrooms anyway.
For staff. What drives me nuts with staff, the signs that says staff should be washing their hands before they leave the bathroom, they put it at the sink. That sign should be at the door. Because if they're not going to wash their hands, they're not going to see that sign.
They're not going to see it at the sink.
Right. Because if they're deciding not to wash their hands.
So they should be at the sink and maybe at the door, maybe on the back of the bathroom door, on the back of the restroom door.
Right. Well, so, on that note,
the stall door,
this is a quandary of mine. Like we go to the bathroom and then we have to unlock the door. Right? We haven't washed our hands before we touch that lock on the door. Does that make sense? So
I know exactly what you're saying.
We're spreading that right away on that bathroom, on that stall door.
And then I go out behind you and I did wash my hands. And now I'm because it lives on surfaces for a long time. So now I'm touching that door. And now if you're sick, I may get sick.
Right. So it's like when you go into the bathroom, you need to put a glove on before you leave the door.
Have you seen the people that use paper towels to get out of the restroom?
Yeah, but I'm thinking even the stall door, though. Like you just finished peeing and pooping in the stall and you have to put your hand on the lock to get yourself out of the bathroom stall.
Well, that's true. So you're hopefully going to wash your hands when you get to the sink. But there's so many, right. How many people use their feet to flush the toilet?
Right. I'm one of those. Yes.
What's on the bottom of your feet?
Right. Yeah. Oh, Francine, there are so many germs out there.
We could do this all day long.
We could do this all day long. And Christina, I like the idea of more signs and definitely targeted to guests as well as the staff. She goes, I like the bathroom doors where you wave your hand over the sensor to open the doors. Wish there were more of those.
Well, and so some facilities stopped using doors on the way out of the restroom. And that's one of the reasons why.
Right. Yeah, I like the foot thing, the door opener with the foot, but that's hard for some people. Some people can't actually do that.
Well, if you're handicapped,
right. Exactly.
A problem. Right. So, signage is a positive signage is never a bad idea. And like I said, if you're in anywhere where they're serving food legally, they're supposed to have signage like everywhere.
Right.
As far as hand washing goes.
Right. Well,
so if you have the ability to check that,
right.
You check it to make sure the signage is there.
Well,
I go to a lot of food safety conferences. And the one thing that I noticed that it's like, I so want to say something and I bite my tongue. The number of people that do not wash their hands. We're at food safety conferences.
Yeah.
It's like, do you know where you are?
Well, it's like going to a diabetes conference and all they're serving is cookies and potato chips. And yes, kind of same thing. Same mindset. So, and this is scary because in a statistic, when you reshared the post about this, us chatting today, you said, and I did the calculations, I went online and figured out the calculations, but there's a 36% increase in outbreaks between August and December of 2023 compared to August in 2024. 2024 has had 36% increase from 2023. Why?
So we're having this year a lot of norovirus incidents, as I will call them. And it's highly contagious. And right now we're in peak season. It's like October to March is peak season. We spend a lot of time indoors. So we're in close proximity to one another. During COVID, and I'm speculating, during COVID, everybody was on high alert as far as hand washing. Mm-hmm. We were all over washing and paying extra attention to washing our hands properly and doing everything the way it should be done. COVID is becoming more of a memory. And I believe that people are becoming more relaxed in hand washing procedures. And the way that we lower the risk of norovirus is by washing our hands. So if people are washing their hands less, norovirus is likely to spread more. Mm-hmm. I've said 1,000 times here that it's highly contagious.
Right.
And if we're not washing our hands and it can spread on doors, on things that we pick up and we put down, it stands to reason that we're going to have higher incidences of we're getting out more.
Right.
We're going out. We're back to, when did you start getting back to like live conferences and live events? In the last year or so.
Bigger ones. Yeah.
So
Mary just commented on here, ideally there should be hand washing station in the food service area, wash hands in restroom, and then again in public view. This might not be possible at all events, but that's how we did it at Whole Foods. Every time you enter or re-enter the department, first stop is the hand washing sink. That's great.
Well, and she brings up a valid point. She's 100%, and Whole Foods does an excellent job. It's double hand washing is what it's called. You wash your hands when you leave the restroom, and when you leave the restroom, you touch the door.
Right.
Anybody that didn't wash their hands, now you've got their germs. And then you wash your hands again when you get back to go back into the back of the house, so to speak. So you've contaminated your hands on the way back as well. So getting back to your workstation, your hands are contaminated. So yes, you should wash your hands again. It's an excellent point, but yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Mary. Appreciate that. So because you brought up COVID, and I commented this, I think I put it in the description of this, is like COVID is not transmitted through food, but norovirus is.
No, that's correct.
And that's a big difference because when COVID hit, everybody's like, Tracy, what's food service? And it's more about the service methods, but this is really about the food. And are there specific foods that we should be more worried about than others? So
norovirus is a foodborne illness.
Okay.
It is a foodborne illness. Okay. So the answer to the question is yes, there are certain foods that are more likely than others. Shellfish, raw shellfish, contaminated water. If it's contaminated with raw sewage, that could be a risk. I don't know and I shouldn't assume, but I don't know if event planners are allowing raw shellfish at they certainly shouldn't be allowing.
You mean like oysters and things like that? It depends on the event and where it is. Yeah.
That could be a risk. Anytime if somebody were to directly vomit in or near a food product, that sounds really disgusting, I guess, but it can happen.
Right.
That food could potentially be contaminated. And we can't assume that everybody is educated as to how this spread or how far it may travel. But let's say somebody throws up within 10 feet of the salad bar or the buffet.
Right.
That should be emptied and everything should be thrown away. So what are the procedures for that? What are the
Right.
procedures if somebody vomits near the salad bar or the buffet?
Right.
If there is an outbreak, can they move from, do they have the ability to move from buffet style to plated?
Right.
Because how many people have been exposed? Everybody, potentially.
Exactly. Well, and then you've got your servers who are going to the back of the house, from the front of the house to the back of the house to get more food. But is there anybody in the back of the house that's just expediting and can take those chafing dishes and turn them into plated meals? That's a good point.
And at the beginning of the outbreak, you don't know who caused the outbreak, or did it come from the back of the house? Did it come from a guest? You know, that is a concern. You can't assume where.
So when this happens, the health department needs to be called, correct?
100%. Yes.
And then, so if it does happen at your event, what's the procedure? What happens?
Okay. So first of all, do you know how many people it takes to constitute an outbreak?
No, that's a good question. 2 people is considered an outbreak. Wow. That's not a lot.
People with the same illness is considered an outbreak that don't.
Right.
Technically, that's the legal definition of an outbreak. But yes, the health department needs to be notified. And I'm going to say that health department's going to make those decisions. Okay. They're going to tell you what you need to do.
Well, now, what if I go to my bedroom and get sick instead of right next to the buffet and I don't tell anybody because I'm embarrassed that I got sick?
And that's how an outbreak happens.
Right. Okay.
That makes sense, right? Because you went to your bedroom and got sick. And I was at a food safety conference last year and I was in the elevator and there were like 5 women in there talking about where they ate night before. And like 3 of them didn't feel well, or maybe a couple days before. 3 of them didn't feel well. And there were a couple other people that had eaten there that were in the elevator that didn't feel well. And they were talking about what they had eaten at the conference. And I'm thinking, that have you told anybody? Where else did you eat?
Right.
And I'm intently listening to this conversation. But if nobody knows, there's nothing they can do.
Right.
Did it come from the event? Did it come from somewhere else they all went to eat? And again, this is how these outbreaks happen. Now, if you and let's say that you get sick, you get norovirus, and your parents get norovirus. You all live in the same house.
Right.
That may not be an outbreak because you all live together. You probably got it from each other. That's a possibility. But if you get it and somebody else at the conference got it, that could be an outbreak.
Okay. I'm just thinking, like my friend Wendy talks about an event years ago that people got Legionnaire's disease. And that was a couple hundred people that got that from the water in the fountain at the hotel. But it really is like, let's put a notice in our event app saying, hey, if you get sick, please notify us, right?
Yes.
Because there's this increase in norovirus right now, we want to be conscientious of anybody that gets sick so that we can help prevent anyone else from getting sick.
Well, right. And awareness is key. You don't want to.
I'm not going to say Francine threw up and pooped and all that, but I want to know that, yeah.
First of all, I'm going to bring up COVID again, just because COVID changed society. Okay. Mm-hmm. Prior to COVID, if you said, look, we want to implement this because people would have freaked out. Now I think people view it more as a public service and they're appreciative. Mm-hmm. So to say to people, if you're showing these symptoms, please do this.
Right.
And you do it in a positive manner. Or if you send it out in the invite that if you are experiencing such and such symptoms, please don't come to the conference.
Right.
And are very clear and concise in a positive manner, people are going to appreciate that. They're not going to be upset about it. And if they are, too bad.
Right.
That's how I feel, because you may have a couple thousand people or a couple hundred people there that they could infect, and you certainly don't want that.
Right. Yeah, no, you don't. I'm texting Christina now to tell her what you just said and to listen at the 27-minute mark. Because it is, I'm like, there are still people that are getting COVID, right? But this, to me, not to just diminish COVID, but this is something I think we need to be putting in our event apps and our pre-conference information when we're sending to people. Is like, just like we want our food service people say to their staff, like, if you feel sick, stay home, right? Same thing with this. We need to say, if you feel sick, stay home. We don't want your germs, in a nicer way, but we don't want your germs.
So I'm not a doctor. Let me preface this. I'm not a doctor, but I think right now, today, this week, COVID, there might be some areas right now that are experiencing issues. I think everybody understands the COVID protocol, and I think most people are pretty respectful of that. I mean, they don't want to spread it, nor do they want to go to an event where they think they may get it.
Right.
However, I don't know that people are as aware or familiar with the protocol for norovirus. And right now, I think that you would be more likely to get norovirus at one of those events than you might be COVID at this time of year.
Right.
With the way things are going, with not necessarily from the food,
right,
from the other human beings not washing their hands.
Right. Exactly. Oh, she's just responding back. But yeah, it is. And that's important to know. I'm about to get on, like I said before we got on the show, I'm about to get on and plane this afternoon to fly to an event and then come back and then go to another event in New Orleans and then an event in Atlantic City. And now I'm like, okay, the one in New Orleans, I'm actually going and I'm talking to the chefs because I'm going to manage food and beverage. So I'm going to have humongous amounts of questions for them on this site visit, saying, hey, what are your protocols? How are you doing this?
So don't touch the elevator buttons with your finger.
Okay. Can we just get those little things that where your fingers like flipping through
I just always use my knuckles.
Yeah.
Just because the elevator buttons are one of the most bacteria-ridden things you can touch. I'm going to take like a hand load of these well-kept, clean and clear the skin before I touch anything. Well, but wait, what did I just say about
alcohol? Just said they cannot do that. They don't get rid of it.
Not norovirus.
Yes. All right. So, and Nancy just replied, or any other screen for that. Yeah, don't touch any.
Just don't touch anything.
Right. Exactly. Like, I'm back.
I don't want to do that to people. I don't want to do that. And the thing is, most of us probably have healthy immune systems. And it's a resilient little virus.
Okay. Okay. So are there any, I'm going to totally change the topic here, but are there any technologies or practices that FDA or any other companies in all the food safety conferences you go to that can help detect this faster?
Norovirus. So norovirus can only be detected through doing like a vomit sample or a stool sample.
So, okay.
I did see last night, and I didn't have a chance just because of the way my day went to do a lot of research, but there have been rumors for a couple years that there may be a vaccine on the horizon.
Okay.
But it's like the flu. You know what I mean?
Right.
You get a flu vaccine. How many different strains of the vaccine are there?
Right. Exactly. And how many different strains of norovirus are there? Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I'm saying. How many different strains of norovirus are there?
Yeah. Right.
You could swab it and send it to a lab somewhere.
Right.
But you don't have time for that.
Right. So when you took your aunt to the hospital last night, how did they determine it?
So because of her age, it didn't start. It started because she thought she was having a heart problem. And I think truly what happened is she was having a panic attack.
Okay.
She didn't feel well, and she started having these really weird heart things. And then when we got there, remember I said explosive diarrhea and projectile vomiting? They ran every test under the sun, like 8 different tubes of blood. They ran, oh my God, CAT scans. They did everything. The diarrhea started after we got there, and so did the vomiting. They both started after we got there, because the doctor came in and he's like, did she have diarrhea before she got here? And I'm like, that's it. And when she had to go to the bathroom, it wasn't like, I think I need to go to the bathroom.
She's like,
I need to go now.
Right.
I need to go now. And the same way with the vomiting, it was like, I'm getting sick now. So that's a very distinct symptom of this. So the doctor came back to talk to me one time about her blood work, and like all the blood work, everything was fine. All of this, everything's coming back fine. And which is amazing for an 85-year-old woman.
Right.
Everything's coming back fine. And he said, where is she in the bathroom again? And I said, yeah, she's over in the restroom. And he said, I'm going to go check with the nurses and I'm going to go over there. So I'm not sure at that point if they did a sample of the vomit or not. They'd done so many different tests. But when he came back the final time, he's like, we have seen so many cases of norovirus. He said, this is what she has. He said, she's got norovirus. So,
wow. Crazy.
And it matched the
symptoms. Yeah.
At that point, I'm like, I was already back in the corner because I know how contagious this is. And I'm like,
right.
If I get sick, I can't be sick before tomorrow. And I'm thinking, good God, I have to do live feed on norovirus tomorrow. How?
Oh my goodness.
This is bizarre.
Yeah. So how much, just thinking about the food handler certification and training for staff, how much, and I need to renew I'm actually at the point that I need to renew mine. So it's been 5 years, but how much focus is put on that norovirus? And then how often do you see in all the companies that you work with on food safety, how often are they giving the training around this?
Okay. So the managers, it depends on
a lot of things.
Depends.
Yeah.
It depends on what regulatory jurisdiction.
Right.
It depends on what regulatory jurisdiction they're in, how often the managers have it. A minimum of once every 5 years. They should be taking a food manager certification. Food handlers, again, same thing. Depends on what regulatory jurisdiction they're in. They may not have to have it. They may not be required to take a food handler certification course. So it would then depend on what the company's requirements are.
Okay.
Many of them don't get it. Now, as I said earlier, anybody, according to the FDA, anybody that is involved in handling food or has a food service business of any type is supposed to have the norovirus cleanup procedures. They're supposed to have food health policies in place that are written that they are supposed to cover with their staff. I know for a fact that doesn't happen because of what I do for a living.
Right.
I know that it doesn't happen, but it is supposed to happen. But training's not one and done. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
You don't hire somebody, go through this stuff at orientation and expect that they're going to remember
it even 2 weeks later.
Because they don't. It's like, I always equate it to raising children. You don't say, don't touch that one time and they never touch it, or don't do that one time and they never do it. It's a consistent reminder process. Mm-hmm. You do it with pre-staff meetings and you put up visual aids, and there's a multitude of things that you need to do to remind people, have quarterly refreshers of going over the paperwork for the different foodborne illnesses. There are 6 that need to be reported to the Department of Health if anybody in your facility or on your staff that could come down with them because they're highly contagious. And norovirus is just one of those. So it really depends on the organization and how important food safety is to them.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that's just thinking from Christina's perspective and, too, is like, okay, so what are your food safety protocols? And then how did you do this? But this should be something that event planners are asking when they're booking, before they book or hire a caterer.
I can tell you what I want to tell you. I can tell you that I've got these food safety protocols in place and this is what we do. And how are you going to know I'm telling you the truth?
True.
Where's the verification and validation? Because that's up to you as the event planner. Just because I said I have it, you need to get some verification and validation. That's your responsibility as an event planner to ask for that.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. I got an email from a client, hotel that I'm using, and this is not about norovirus, but it's about labeling of food. And they're like, well, we only label for these 3 things, like nuts and dairy and gluten. I'm like, no, I want you to label if it has any of the top 9 allergens in it. Start with the start, well, we're going to have to reevaluate the size of our label and if we can make it work. I'm like, oh, believe me, I'm going to make you do that.
If you can't make it work, we're going to have to do something different.
Right, exactly. And then I'm like, and I have one woman who's 82 and anaphylactic to wine, and so like wine vinegar. And I'm like, and you're going to label everything for wine, as well, because I don't want anybody having an anaphylactic reaction, and you shouldn't either. Yeah.
So if a restaurant, I'm going to go with McDonald's because McDonald's just had Taylor Farms was their supply. Mm-hmm. They just had an outbreak because Taylor Farms had an issue. Taylor Farms was their vendor. Is this all Taylor Farms' fault? A large portion of it is Taylor Farms supplied the product.
Right.
But how much liability does McDonald's have for using Taylor Farms and not following up doing the verification and validation to make sure that Taylor Farms was doing what they said they were doing?
Right. Well, and then, okay, so then I remember sitting in a class, and this was about sustainability, and this guy's like, well, we monitor ourselves. We don't have any outside monitoring by anybody. It's just this is what we say we do. Like, my friend Mariella and I are like, but how do we know that you're not lying? Same thing about that, right? So how often does the health inspector come? And is that something that the health inspector's checking?
It's not even just the health inspector. They should have a second, third-party auditor come in and check. Health inspectors might come in once a year, maybe. That's the health department. When I took over that city that I was doing health inspectors, I discovered a health inspection hadn't been done in 4 years for some places. So ask for their second or third party inspections. Who's doing them? Who's the company that's doing them? Require it.
Right.
If they want your business.
We take it for granted so much. It's yeah.
Never assume anything.
No. And I've done random posts throughout the years of like when I see, and I remember walking down Boston and one hotel had their A score in the window. And I'm like, that's great. I said, but how many of you actually ask your hotels that question? You see it at restaurants. So your health inspection score is there on the window, but hotels, you don't see it. And convention centers, you don't see it. I'm like, we need to be asking those questions because this could happen. Yeah.
And I really question 100 on it. I just had this conversation with, I think it was Hal King. I really question 100 on a health inspection. And it's not you go in looking for problems, but at any time on any given day, nobody's perfect. And you're bound to find something that's not right. And it may be only for that time while you're there. They may normally do a very good job.
Right.
But I question 100.
Right. Yeah.
97, 98, 95. But 100, unless they were closed and just opened,
Yeah.
I have serious doubts about that.
Right. Good point. Yeah. So, okay. So going into a meeting, Christina's got some great advice. And if you weren't listening to us at the very beginning, Christina asked a bunch of questions at the very beginning of the show about what we should do. But, because she's got an event next week, what can meeting planners do? What advice do you have meeting planners doing when, like, hey, I'm going to meet the hotel and the convention center and the chef next week for the first time? The contract's already been signed. So I'm just there managing food and beverage, but what advice do you have for planners?
So the contract's already been signed
by my client. So that's a done deal.
Okay. And as an event planner, you're just going to go in and manage for food and manage all the food and beverage.
Mm-hmm.
Well, really the things that we already talked about.
Right.
So you go in and you do the assessment, the venue assessment. You look around the kitchen, look at what you see. You can see a lot. I'm going to assume that most event planners have basic food safety knowledge.
I'm going to say
Am I
no.
wrong?
You're wrong.
Okay.
So what should they? So that's a question for you. What should we be going to get our own food handler certification?
So if you're an event planner and you're responsible for food and beverage, you should have basic food safety knowledge, because how can you be responsible? And this is by no means a criticism. How can you be responsible for food and beverage and not have basic food safety knowledge?
Right.
How can you be responsible for the people that are coming to eat at that venue and not have basic food safety knowledge? Because how do you know what you're looking for?
Right.
So step one, at the very minimum, take a food manager. You don't need to be experts.
Right.
You don't need to be experts, but by all means, you should have just the very basics, because you need to know,
food handler.
No, food manager.
Food manager.
Okay. Food handler is like food manager.
Okay. Perfect.
There's a difference, the food manager, because you need to know, how do you know what the venue layout should look like? How do you know what you're looking for? Is it set up in a way that's going to prevent cross-contamination? How many hand sinks should they have? Are there things that are allowed to be jacked up when you go in to look? Do they have are there shredded carrots in the hand sink? Because there shouldn't be, but there might be. That's a problem. Can you get to the hand sinks? You know what I mean?
Right.
When you look in the refrigerators, and you should look in the refrigerators, is the food.
I really doubt that we're going to get allowed to be looking in the refrigerators.
They won't. Is a food and beverage person? They're not going to let you. If you're in charge of it, they're not going to let you look in there. No,
I don't know. I'm going to try that next week.
Let me know how that goes.
I will.
Let me know how that goes.
I will definitely.
Because that food in that refrigerator should be stored. It should be stored properly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That should be stored properly. But it was the things that we talked about during that risk assessment, because you need to know what is your risk. You're there in that.
Right.
To determine what the risk assessment is. Hand hygiene practices. Where are the hand washing, even for the guests, where are they? Right. And if they say to you that, well, we have hand sanitizer stations set up everywhere, that's not enough, because the hand sanitizer isn't going to kill everything. Records for training their staff.
Right.
Ask for those. Policies, again, attendees, do they encourage their attendees to stay at home? Do they have records of the foodborne illness policies? What are their foodborne illness policies? Do they have foodborne illness policies?
Exactly.
And then there are emergency plans, emergency response strategies for suspected outbreaks.
Yeah, because kind of going back to that, and I want to know what that happens if somebody is projectile vomiting in the ballroom or wherever they are. What is your step? What is your procedure from your front of house staff to manage that and call the EMTs and the health department?
These aren't invasive questions. And that emergency plan doesn't just include, that includes how are they cleaning it up?
True. Yeah. Yeah.
They should have a norovirus cleanup procedures. So it's like, how are you cleaning this crap up?
Pun intended. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. How their vendors, how do they select their vendors? Choose fresh and local. How do you know? Truth.
Right.
What are they doing? Are they out there harvesting their shellfish from the bottom of the ocean and bringing them in? Or how do you know that they're approved vendors?
Right. And
these are all very serious. What cleaning protocols do they follow? How do they prevent cross-contamination? Somebody gets sick while they're working. What do? Do they send them home? Or we're shorthanded, we're keeping you.
That's a really good point for hotels and convention centers right now, because they are shorthanded, right? And you need to send them home. Can I jump back to the cross-contamination versus cross-contact? Can you?
That's a great question. And you obviously know the answer to that question, or I don't think you would have asked it.
Yeah.
Those words get used interchangeably, and they are not interchangeable. Cross-contamination has to do with foodborne illnesses. Cross-contact is a food allergen phrase. So cross-contamination is when we're spreading bacteria and pathogens from one food to another. I said cross-contamination there, didn't I?
You did.
Cross-contact. And I've had editors take this out of my articles, the cross-contact out of my, and I'm like, no, leave that in there. And cross-contact is when the protein that causes the anaphylactic reaction is transferred from one product to another.
Gotcha. So like the piece of cheese getting in the non-cheese salad.
Right. Or let's say they were talking about this morning on a radio station that I was listening to. There's so much misinformation shared on like TV and the radio stations. It just boggles my mind. They were talking about peanut butter and jelly and using the same knife for peanut butter and jelly. Okay.
Yep.
So is that okay or is it not okay? Okay. Well, if you're at home and you want to use the same knife and nobody's allergic to peanut butter, whatever floats your boat, go ahead, do it, whatever. But if you're working in a restaurant, absolutely, positively not. You cannot do that because that protein from that peanut butter remains on that knife. You can't just wipe it off, and it has to be washed, rinsed, and sanitized to remove that protein from that knife. If you stick it even into that jelly and you can't, just because you can't see it in that jelly does not mean that it's not there. Somebody that's allergic to peanut butter could go in anaphylactic shock and die from having that jam spread on something that doesn't even contain peanut butter, and you could kill them. That's the difference.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We need that clarification. And I'm glad, the definition is there. It's that the norovirus is the cross contamination, the food allergy is the cross contact, because
they're not visible.
Right.
You can't see it. It makes it hard for people to comprehend it sometimes because it's not something that we can see. So it's like, nah. And food allergens are even worse because people just don't take them as seriously as they should,
And we've got somebody posted yesterday, like there were 2 deaths. There's so many deaths in the last quarter of last year from food allergic reactions in restaurants. And Dominique Brown was at an event, and it needs to stop. And it just reiterates the importance of having a culinary concierge be on your staff when you're planning an event to answer all the questions or ask all the questions that you just said, right? Because you as a meeting planner, you're handling 5 zillion details of here's the AV, here's when people are coming into the room, and all the details that we handle. But having somebody 100% focused on food and beverage is imperative.
Right. And so many people will. Somebody actually said that this morning. They're like, well, just wipe off the knife and then no, you can't You just can't do that. You need to use a separate knife.
Yeah. Yes.
Somebody later might make at a separate time, might come back in and make jelly bread and use that jelly. And can't do that.
Can't do that. Okay. I have actually got to go get on a drive to get on a plane. So what is your final, I have a 2-hour drive, but what's your final advice around this norovirus? Oh, Nancy just said, please take this in the spirit in which it is intended. Watching this episode is like eating just before taking a swim. I'm going to have to wait an hour before I have lunch.
People say to me all the time, it's like, especially when I was doing health inspections, how can you do this and just go eat? We become acclimated to what we do you don't ever want to eat lunch with a bunch of health inspectors or a bunch of food safety people because nothing is off the table and nothing's off limits.
Did you watch is Bad Monkey? Did you watch that television show?
I don't think so.
It's Vince Vaughn, and he's a police officer. And anyways, he has to go do health inspections, and it's showing some very gross things. And the guy's like, well, no, don't show me down. He's like, yeah, I need to because he
have pictures that you would just probably never eat again if you saw them. But, it's what it is. So what I would say is that, focus overall on the guest experience by prioritizing quality, presentation, and safety. And I said safety last, but safety is first. Mentioned using fresh, quality, local sourced ingredients, creating that welcoming. You don't want to scare people, but you want to make sure that they're safe. I used to say, don't serve anything that you wouldn't eat yourself. But then I discovered there's a lot of people that eat things that I wouldn't necessarily eat. So you want to make sure that you, like you said earlier, I think, accommodate dietary needs. And by doing this and making sure that even your guests are aware that you are putting these protocols in place by seeing the signage and seeing the employees wearing different colored gloves for different tasks and changing their gloves and washing their hands repeatedly is going to make them feel valued and engaged in the process. You're going to grow your venue. You're going to grow your business when they see that because it makes them feel important and like they matter.
Right. Oh, I couldn't have said it better. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And just the fact that food safety will help you grow your business, right? Just in general, it's something that we as event professionals who are hiring vendors and looking at vendors we need to be asking these questions to make sure that we're hiring legitimate and solid organizations.
And it's important to remember on top of that it goes beyond asking the questions. Because I assure you, when I ask questions, I get the answers I want to hear. I always get the answers I want to hear. So I needed to learn how to ask beyond the questions and to get what I needed to support the answer.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. If I ask somebody, so how do you make sure that the buffet temperatures on your buffet are within the food safety standards? And they're like, well, we take the temperatures every 4 hours. And that's great. I'm happy to hear that you do that because that's certainly makes me feel better and it would make our guests feel better as well. Can I see your temperature logs? And then they're like, well, you asked to see the receiving logs for the last 30 days from their vendors. Can I see your receiving logs for the last 30 days from your vendors to make sure that you're using approved suppliers? And they're like, and somebody pulled out the book. There were no receiving logs.
Wow.
Didn't have one receiving log.
And okay, just on that one note, and what's an approved vendor?
Oh, good question. So an approved vendor is somebody that is, I need to just sum this up. An approved vendor is somebody that is inspected, is following the government regulations, and doing their due diligence to make sure that the food products are safe in a nutshell.
Okay.
And they can provide you with their HACCP plans and their anything that you need for that particular product to make sure that it is an approved vendor. If I am working an event and I run out of lemons and I run to the grocery store, the local market, to get lemons, is that an approved vendor? No. It is not an approved vendor. Those lemons are fine for you to take home and eat. They are not an approved vendor for a restaurant or anybody that's serving the general public. If I have an approved vendor list for like a Cisco or a US Foods and I have all the documentation, and if you ask them for that, they're going to give it to you. They will give you what you need. They are approved vendors because they can provide you for whatever ingredient you're ordering for them. And they're just the big names. They're the ones that are coming off the top of my head. If you're using local resourced food, they need to provide you with the same documentation that you would need from a larger resource. Okay. They have to jump through hoops to get that documentation, but they can do it.
Right. That's what Track Savvy's doing, right?
Yes.
Okay. No.
Not Track Savvy, wrong company. My Food Source.
My Food Source.
My Food Source.
But both of them are your company.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but yes, and that's it legitimately want to maintain those records and make sure that they can provide them because that's important.
Yeah.
And it covers you as well because now I have this documentation, but you don't get it once. You have to maintain that documentation.
Like annually, making sure like I've got my certification, it's renewed and things like that. Yeah. Okay. Francine, this has been so enlightening. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I don't want anyone to eat poop, which don't eat poop.
No, don't eat poop.
Is the name of her podcast that she co-hosts. Okay. I have it here here is Savvy Food Safety's website. And then if you'd like to connect with Francine, here is her LinkedIn profile. And anywhere else they want to, where do they listen to Don't Eat Poop?
Anywhere where you stream your favorite podcasts. We are on all streaming.
Okay. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. And I'm so glad that I reached out and got you on here. Thank you, Nancy and Joan and Christina that were listening and tuning and commenting. I appreciate you. And who did I forget up here? Mary, thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate this. And Francine, you're a wealth of knowledge and I so appreciate you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
It's been a lot of fun. And stay on for 1 second once I close up here. Everybody stay tuned for next week's episode. I will be coming to you, I believe, from the Detroit airport, but we're going to talk. The next 2 episodes for January are about non-alcoholic beverages as well as vegan dishes at events, all thanks to Sodexo Live is providing a food and beverage director and an executive chef to talk about those. So until then, stay safe and eat well. And thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.